Today's scripture reading is Jeremiah 29, 4 through 14. This is what the eternal commander of the heavenly armies and God of Israel says to those he exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build your houses, make your home for your families, because you are not coming back to Judah anytime soon. Plant gardens and eat the food you grow there. Marry and have children. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they can have children. During these years of captivities, let your families grow and not die out. Pursue the peace and welfare of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to me, the Eternal. For Babylon, because of its peace, you will live in peace. This is what the Eternal, commander of the heavenly armies and God of Israel, says to you. Do not be fooled by false prophets and fortune tellers among you. Do not listen to dreamers for their interpretations of dreams, for I did not send them to you. They are prophesying lies in my name. So says the Eternal, if you want the truth, this is what the Eternal has to say. You will remain in Babylon for 70 years. When that time is over, I will come to you, and you will keep my promise of bringing you back home. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Eternal, plans for peace, not evil, to give you a future and hope. Never forget that. At that time, you will call out for me, and I will hear you. You will pray, and I will listen. You will look for me intently, and you will find me. Yes, I will be found by you, says the Eternal, and I will restore your fortune and gather you from all the nations where you have been scattered, all the places where I have driven you, and I will bring you back to the land that is your rightful home.
I don't know about you. I always have this sense of excitement, like in this moment right here. Because you never know exactly what's going to happen. I have it written down, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so I have this kind of excited, eager anticipation. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we got ready to move. We decided it was time. And my parents had come across, there was an opportunity to buy some land out in the country, 40 acres of property, had a dam, a pond, rolling hills, lots of farmland and things, some woods. And so they thought this was a good opportunity and began drawing up plans, blueprints for the house that they wanted to build. This would be their second house that they had custom designed and built, and it was meant to sort of be this dream home type of situation. It's going to be right on the pond, so fishing, literally, you could do right off the front porch. If Dad wanted to go hunting, it wasn't too far of a walk to the woods, and then he could bring whatever it was right back to the house pretty easily. It seemed like this really ideal situation, and so they began drawing up blueprints. Mom liked to do that, and so she's drawing up these blueprints. She has this idea, and they begin meeting with a contractor. They decided that the best way to do this is they're actually going to have an in-ground house. Now, how many people know what an in-ground house is? Okay, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? It's a house that's in the ground. Essentially, you dig out your foundation rather than laying it on top of the ground, and then you build the house into the ground so that when it's all said and done, as you're walking along on the ground, the roof is probably like right here. It starts right here and then peaks up. And so they began drawing out these designs. It's supposed to be better for the heating and cooling and all that stuff. It's supposed to be a good idea. Plus, you know, it would be the first tornado-safe house because it would be in ground. And so we were all excited by that. And Mom and Dad sat down with the contractor and they began going over the details. What would happen, what the house would look like. Now, they wanted to keep it a ranch-style house for expense purposes, and so they began explaining this to the contractor. Oh yeah, that makes sense. And so then the contractor assures them that he has it all under control. And so, building begins on the house, and they start digging out this giant hole in the side of the hill that's right by the pond, and then they start coming in and pouring concrete for the retaining walls, the big concrete walls that would hold back all the dirt and stuff. And Dad, of course, is working during the day, so Mom is there, but she doesn't know a whole lot about the process or anything. She's just trusted that the guy who is the contractor has told his builders what to do. I mean, that makes sense, right? Yeah. And so the concrete's getting poured, and it all seems to be going well. But as a few days go on, they start looking at things a little closer and realize that the house, and specifically the area where mine and my brother's rooms were going to be, were about 1 foot by 1 foot smaller than they had originally planned. Now, our rooms originally had only been 10 by 10, which isn't too big for a bedroom, right? So you take 1 by 1 off of that, and now mine and my brother's rooms are 9 by 9. Uh-huh. You put a 6-foot bed in that, there's not a whole lot of room left. And so there had to be some major change, and so they're upset. I mean, the concrete is kind of stuck. You can't just get rid of concrete retaining walls very easily. And to put it on top of that, the people who were laying the lines and everything, they thought that this was just the basement, that it wasn't going to be our main living area. And so they had cut a spot in the wall and started to run the sewer line about waist high on the wall. Waist high sewer line's not good, right? Thankfully that one got corrected, but the whole situation ended up to where now our ranch-style house, which was, built relatively small to try and save on money and things, had to become a 2-story house. My brother and my room had to be bumped upstairs, which then affects all your heating and cooling, which you were trying to save on in the first place. Things didn't quite go according to plan. Life is messy. Right? Everybody say that with me. Life is messy. So what do when life doesn't go according to plan? I don't know if you know this, but I always bring my Bible on stage with me. And part of the reason that I do that is because that's just how I was taught and how I was brought up. The other part of the reason for that is when Adam and Eve first took that bite in the Garden of Eden and sin entered the world and it infected everything, I found that computers were infected far worse than anything else in all of creation. And so I've learned it's always good to have a backup just in case computers fail. You'll notice there's no phone, there's no laptop this morning, no screen, because God has a way of doing things to where if I'm going to preach about something, He needs to teach me about it first. So I thought I would beat God off at the pass and not even use the computer this morning. Instead, God made me make mistakes all week. You can talk to Cindy about this later, and I hadn't planned to talk about this, but it's too good to avoid. I'm really, as others would put it, CDO about details, right? OCD, has to be in order. I'm very obsessive about details, especially when it comes to anything that we print. Go over it again and again and again, make sure things are lined up right. But, just to give you a brief overview for those who don't know, I put the wrong date on the board meeting agenda. So it actually said that the board meeting was Friday instead of Thursday. And then I counted about 4 mistakes in this week's bulletin that I should have caught. So even when I think I've beaten God, He finds a way to go, no. What do you do when things don't go according to plan? If you have a Bible, and I know you do, I encourage you to turn to Jeremiah chapter 29, because that's where we're going to be. Jeremiah 29. And Jeremiah is in the Old Testament, for those who don't know. Jeremiah is one of the 4 major prophets. If you need to know what the 4 major prophets are, please turn your attention to the stained glass over here. The four major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. They're called the major prophets just because they're longer by word. It has nothing to do about who's most important or anything like that. It's just about who wrote the most. So those four prophets wrote the most as far as prophecy goes. And Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. There's a lot of crying in Jeremiah. Jeremiah wrote 2 books. Do you know what they are? Jeremiah. I'll give you that one. And start for the day if anybody can come up with it. Lamentations. Okay, Jeremiah and Lamentations. And the word lamentations, or to lament, means to cry, or to mourn, to grieve, right? So Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, as well as in Lamentations, does a lot of crying. A lot of crying to God, a lot of crying to people, a lot of crying in general, okay? So he's known in all of our silly theological circles as the weeping prophet. So we turn to Jeremiah chapter 29. Is everybody there? I hope so. Jeremiah 29. To give you a little bit of context, things are not going according to plan for the nation of Israel. You guys remember the nation of Israel? They were originally known as the Hebrews, and then they ended up in Egypt, enslaved by the Pharaoh. If some of this sounds familiar, give me a nod, okay? And then Moses comes on the scene, and he, let my people go, and he marches out with over 1 million plus Israelites, this huge nation of people, and they make their way to the Promised Land. But as you know, it took them a while to get there, 40 years of wandering, and then finally they make it to the Promised Land, the land that God had promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Generation after generation, you're going to have this special part of the world as yours. They finally get there, and they begin to have trouble, right? They begin looking for other people to lead them. They begin to look for other gods to lead them. They begin to look for other things. They run into lots of issues. By the time that Jeremiah is written, by the time that Jeremiah writes, there is a nation called Babylon. Everybody say Babylon.
Babylon.
Babylon is this huge empire that's conquering the world, and Israel is one of the places that they conquer. And so they take the Israelites out of their promised land, their home that was given to them by God. They take the Israelites out of there, they capture them, they chain them up, they drag them back to Babylon. Now, I realize that doesn't happen a lot, so I'm going to give you a modern day example. Let's say that there's a war between Illinois and Wisconsin. Okay? Anybody from Wisconsin? Before I offend you? Okay. Let's say there's a war between Illinois and Wisconsin comes, and they march down here in their helmets made of cheese, and they storm Mazan. They drag us all from our homes. They bring us back across the state line back into Wisconsin. Once we get there, things change. We all have to learn how to speak Swiss, right? We have to learn that cheese is its own food group. And one last thing, which may be the hardest one for anybody to accept, we would all have to be Green Bay Packer fans. I know. That seems silly, right? But that's what happened. This foreign empire comes into Israel, captures everyone. Some are killed. Others are captured. They leave just a smattering of people left in Jerusalem to make sure the place doesn't, completely fall apart. They drag everybody back to Babylon, where they're forced to eat like Babylonians, talk like Babylonians, worship like Babylonians, go to school like Babylonians, and they're not Babylonians. And so this is a totally difficult, awkward, foreign situation that the Israelites find themselves in. And Jeremiah, in chapter 29, I do hope you're there, he sends this letter to the people who are enslaved in Babylon, the Israelites who have been ripped out of their homes and driven back to Babylon. And he speaks on God's behalf. He says in verse 4, chapter 29, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Now, you're expecting there to be some escape plan, right? You're expecting there to be this quick fix okay, God sees the people are in dire straits, and so there's going to be this, okay, boys, we're going to get together every Tuesday night, and we're going to hash out this strategy, we're going to train up, and we're going to play Eye of the Tiger in the background, and then when it's all said and done, we're going to storm the Babylonian throne room, we're going to take the king, and we're going to demand that he let our people go, right? That's what we expect. And this is what God says to the people through Jeremiah 29, verse 5. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Okay. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Not much of a military strategy. Okay. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Okay, God. Terrible war, people died, driven across the border to this foreign empire, and your big plan is you want us to build houses, plant gardens, get married, have kids, marry off our kids, and then pray for the Babylonians? Yep. So what do when life doesn't go quite according to plan? Settle in. Make the best of the situation. Live life fully, right where you're at. That seems to be what God is teaching here. There's opportunity here. If you know anything about this time period, you know that Daniel actually was one of those Israelites that were taken captive and taken over to Babylon, and Daniel had this incredible influence on the people because of the choices that he made. See, life is filled with opportunities to either choose God or to reject Him. And sometimes in the messiness, rejection seems like our only option, but God says there's another way. There's something better that can occur. My son Parker, if you guys get tired of Parker illustrations, just tell me. But he's so gosh darn cute. My son Parker got a toy box for Christmas. My parents got him a big plastic toy box. And when they were up a couple weeks ago, they brought it up finally, and we got it all set up in his play area there in the living room. And Parker has a lot of toys, okay? And so what I did was we set it up, and then I took all the loose stuff, and I put it all in there, and I shut the door. He was a little stunned at first, right? Like, what are you doing with all my stuff? A little upset by that. But an incredible thing happened. Once we got everything up out of the floor, my son, who to that point had only been crawling and sort of sidestepping along walls, started taking off on his own across the room. Because now, there was nothing in his way. It was crazy. Like the day or two after we set up the toy box, Parker started walking all over the place. Up to that point, like 2-3 weeks ahead of time, every night, 7:30, we would practice walking. He, myself, and Rachel, he would walk between us, but he wouldn't walk anywhere else in the room until we got the toy box and we took away some of his stuff and put it in storage. He had to lose something in order to experience something greater. It's hard. Spirituality is messy. There was a book written years back by a guy named Mike Yaconelli. Everybody say Yaconelli. Yaconelli. I just think it's a cool last name. Mike Yaconelli. He was the president of Youth Specialties, which is an organization that provides training and resources and curriculum for youth pastors. He wrote this book entitled Messy Spirituality, and it's actually the first book that I read recreationally when I was in college. I read other books, fiction and whatever, but this was when I was in college, and so I often recommend it to other people. But in this book, Messy Spirituality, Mike Yaconelli says this. He says, spirituality is anything but a straight line. It is a mixed up, topsy-turvy, helter-skelter godliness that turns our lives into an upside-down toboggan ride full of unexpected turns, surprise bumps, and bone-shattering crashes. In other words, messy spirituality is the delirious consequence of a life, get this, ruined by a Jesus who will love us right into his arms. I love that wording, because we often don't think about our life being ruined by Jesus, but what Jesus does is he takes our perfect little plan, our life that we have all lined up, the things that we have to get done, our checklist, and he goes, there you go. No, I'm supposed to be mad at my enemy. No. I want you to love your enemy. Pray for them. No, I'm supposed to seek revenge. Nope. Build a house. Plant a garden. Settle down. Make the best of the situation you're in. That's what Jesus does. He mixes up our lives and says, look, I want you to take care of the widows and the orphans. I want you to give more than you receive. I want you to live radically so that you can live eternally. That's what Jesus does. He takes our idea of a perfect faith, our idea of a perfect spirituality, and he messes it up a little bit. There's brokenness there. And it's all according to plan, or at least the end result is the same. Wrong book. Here we go. Jeremiah chapter 29. Everybody still in Jeremiah? You didn't lose it? Good, because I did. Okay, there we go. Jeremiah chapter 29. So God tells the people through Jeremiah, this is what I want you to do. Build houses, plant gardens, get married, marry off your kids, pray for the people who have just captured you. Then he goes on to say, and this is a familiar passage for most of you, starting verse 10. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Poll the audience. How many people are at least 70 years old? Imagine this. Imagine that 70 years ago, okay, someone had come to your parents and said, 70 years from now, your son, your daughter, is going to be at Park Street Church in Mazan. They're going to sit in such and such a row. They're going to wear such and such an outfit. And there's going to be such and such a preacher standing on such and such a stage wearing such a nice bow tie. That would have seemed ridiculous, right? For someone to come up 70 years ago and make a promise to your parents or to you, right? And yet, in Jeremiah 29, verse 10, God says, 70 years from now, I'm going to fulfill this promise. Can you imagine, those of you who are over 70, can you imagine waiting 70 years for a promise to come true? And here's the reality of this, right? We love the passage, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. How many people have heard that verse before? Yeah. A lot of us have it. We have it on banners and on placards and posters and all sorts of stuff, bumper stickers, right? We love that verse. But there's two parts to that, right? Beforehand, it says 70 years are going to go by before I fulfill these promises. And there were some people who are sitting there in Babylon, just captured, 78 years old, going, I'm going to be 148 before God answers his prayer? Truth is, sometimes God fulfills his promises and we don't see the end result. But sometimes our kids do, or our kids' kids, or the next generation, or a different group of people. The other side of that, verse 11, if you look back in your Bibles, it says, the first two words, I know, I being God. He doesn't say, I know, and here's every detail. He doesn't say, I know, let me draw it out for you. This is exactly what's going to happen. He just says, I know. I know the plan. Don't worry, it's a good plan. It's good for you. I know what's best for you. I know what's coming. I've got it all taken care of. But he doesn't tell the people who are probably desperate for answers, who are probably needy, who are probably scared, who are probably confused, who are probably crying out to God, going, God, where you at? And all he does is say, I know the plan. Just trust me. Just trust me. It's hard. Because in order to be delivered, the Israelites had to experience exile. In order to experience God's promises fulfilled, they had to first go through 70 years away from home. The reality is, until we are willing to be broken, to endure suffering, we may not fully experience the promise of God. And that's hard. That's hard. Or to put it another way, there is no resurrection without a crucifixion. Where did I put it? There we go. Yaconelli. Everybody say Yaconelli?
Yaconelli.
That's the only thing you're going to remember. He says elsewhere, until we admit that we are a mess, Jesus won't have anything to do with us. Once we admit how unlovely we are, how unattractive we are, how lost we are, Jesus shows up unexpectedly. According to the New Testament, Jesus is attracted to the unattractive. He prefers the lost ones over the found ones, the losers over the winners, the broken instead of the whole, the messy instead of the unmessy, the crippled instead of the non-crippled. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you should have a negative perspective on yourself. That's not what it means at all. It's about having an honest understanding of who you are in the cosmos. We're broken. We're lost. We make mistakes. Don't worry, the jacket's the only thing coming on. So I don't know if you can tell, but my shirt is imperfect. Right? I don't know if you can see it, but there are actually, I counted this morning, 3 different spots where the laundry detergent stained my shirt. Now it'll wash out in the next wash, but there's still 3 darker spots on my shirt. You cannot tell because I'm not turning around. I didn't iron the back of my shirt at all. Okay. But put this jacket on. And you can't see any of that. Right? A lot of times what happens in churches is we think that churches are only for healthy people. Churches are only for people who have their act together. Churches are only for people who walk on water. And the reality is the church is filled with people who are sick and broken and lost and confused and who don't have it all lined up. I've heard the metaphor used that the church is actually a hospital for sinners. There are no healthy people at the hospital. They're all patients, looking for a healer. Until we admit that, Jesus will have nothing to do with it. It's not a bad thing to admit your imperfections. It keeps you humble, and it gives God room to work. One of my favorite communicators, although I don't agree with everything he says, but his name is Rob Bell. He wrote a book called Drops Like Stars, and in that book he quotes a Franciscan priest by the name of Richard Rohr. Don't need to know any of that. But Richard Rohr tells a story about Native Americans and how they will oftentimes, when they're weaving together blankets or rugs, they will leave one corner or one section of the blanket or rug imperfect and undone with strings and things that just kind of hang there. The reason that they do that is because they believe that in that imperfection, in that open space, that is where the Spirit enters into their work. Different religions, but maybe the truth is the same. That's where the Spirit enters. The healthiest disciples admit their own brokenness. The healthiest churches admit their own weaknesses. The healthiest leaders recognize that they are not the best. There's something about messiness and brokenness that helps us to experience Jesus. Colonel John Hannibal Smith. John Hannibal Smith, that name might sound familiar to some of you. How many people remember watching The A-Team on TV? Anybody watch The A-Team a while back? Yeah, and then they did a movie remake a couple years ago with Liam Neeson and Bradley Cooper. Colonel John Hannibal Smith, Hannibal, was the leader of that little group, and these guys were soldiers. They would go and they would perform these missions, and they would try all sorts of things, and it would be crazy, crazy stuff. Things that you scratch your head and go, that's not even possible, that's ridiculous. And all sorts of stuff would happen. You're watching the episode or you're watching the movie and things are blowing up and people are getting shot in the arm and nobody wants to get shot in the arm. And you know, all sorts of weird, bizarre things are happening. You think this is terrible, this is catastrophic. The whole thing is falling apart. But somehow, by the end of the episode, by the end of the movie, things work together, things come into place, and it all works out for the A-Team. And Colonel John Hannibal Smith, at the end of almost every episode of that television show, pick up his signature cigar, and he would say, "I love it when a plan comes together." Sometimes in life it seems like there is chaos. How is this working? There's pain, there's craziness, there's suffering, there's exile, there's people coming in and out of our lives, and it doesn't make any sense. And we want to know, God, what's the plan here? God says, well, I know the plan. We say, God, where are you? And he says, well, I carried you into exile, and I will carry you out. What we have to do when life is messy, when it's crazy, when it's chaos, is to embrace the brokenness. Don't hide it. Don't run from it. Recognize it. And then trust in the God who will carry us through according to his plan. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for your plan. That you hold the entire universe in your hands. And God, even though we don't know every little detail of how everything plays out, We trust you. And God, you know, and you didn't even try to sugarcoat it. You told us in this world we would have trouble, we would have pain, we would have struggle. And so we shouldn't necessarily be surprised when those things happen. But they should be opportunities for us to lean more into you. They should be opportunities for us to trust you more. They should be opportunities for us to read our Bible more. So, Father, I pray in times of good and in times of bad, in times of struggle and in times of victory, that you would give us this overwhelming hunger for you. Let us not pretend that we are perfect people, but let us admit that we are broken, healed only by Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray.